you already know this place. Even if you have never stood on that green ridge in the clouds, you have seen it 1,000 times. The terraces climbing into the sky, the gray stone walls, the sharp green peak rising behind them like a frozen wave, and you know its name. Everyone on Earth knows its name, Machu Picchu. But here is the strange thing. The people who built it may never have called it that. When researchers went back, not into the jungle, but into old notebooks, faded maps, and documents written centuries before any explorer arrived, they found something that should not be possible for one of the most famous places in the world. The name we all say, the name on the postcards, the name on your phone screen right now, seems to have been attached to these ruins barely 100 years ago. The city the Inca actually built up there was almost certainly called something else. And that is only the first crack in the story. Because once you start pulling on that single thread, the whole familiar picture begins to unravel. The lone explorer who discovered a lost city was guided there by people already living inside it. The emperor who supposedly built it may have ruled at the wrong time. The servants buried on the mountain carried a secret inside their bones for 500 years. And incredibly, right now, this very year, machines are firing lasers into the forest around Machu Picchu and finding roads that no one had ever mapped. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you will realize that Machu Picchu was never really the solved wonder in the tourist brochure. It is one of the greatest unfinished mysteries on the planet, and we are still, at this very moment, discovering what it truly was. Before we climb up there together, a quick and honest word. This is a small, independent channel. There is no big company behind it, no sponsors, no budget. It runs on nothing but the kindness of people like you on the other side of the screen. So if you enjoy this journey, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, dropping a comment, and sharing it with someone who loves a real mystery. Every one of those small gestures keeps this work alive, and I am genuinely grateful. Now, let us go to the mountain. Close your eyes for a moment and put yourself there. You are standing on a narrow ridge high in the eastern Andes of Peru, roughly 2,400 meters above the sea. The air is thin and cool and smells of wet stone and green growth. Below you, so far down that it makes your stomach turn, a brown river coils through the gorge. That is the Urubamba, and it is nearly 500 meters beneath your feet. Now feel the strangeness of this place. Behind you rise the high, cold peaks of the Andes, but in front of you, the mountains fall away into something else entirely. Warm, wet, tangled cloud forest, orchids, hummingbirds, the edge of the Amazon. Machu Picchu sits exactly on the seam where two worlds meet, the roof of the Andes and the mouth of the jungle. It feels like the end of the world. And that is the first thing the postcards get wrong. They show you an island of ruins floating alone above the clouds. But Machu Picchu was never alone. It was a chosen point on a vast web of stone roads called the Huayna, the Great Inca Highway, that stretched for more than 30,000 kilometers across mountains, deserts, and coasts. Machu Picchu was not a secret hideaway at the end of nowhere. It was a deliberate address on the largest road network the ancient Americas ever built. So picture it not as a lost city, but as a jewel set carefully into a living landscape of ridges, springs, sacred peaks, and that enormous river below. Every stone was placed with intention. The question that has haunted people for over a century is simple and maddening. Intention for what? To even begin answering that, you would think we could start with its name, but we cannot. And this is where the story turns strange right away. In the year 2022, a historian named Donato Amado Gonzalez and an archaeologist named Brian Bauer published the results of a quiet piece of detective work. They were not digging in the dirt. They were digging through paper, through the field notebooks of the explorer who made the site famous, through maps drawn in the 1800s, through documents written in the 1600s when the memory of the Inca world was still fresh. And the picture they assembled was remarkable. In all of that older evidence, the ruins on the ridge were not called Machu Picchu. The settlement seems to have been known as Picchu, or, most likely of all, Huayna Picchu. Say that to yourself slowly. One of the most visited, most photographed, most beloved ancient places on Earth may have spent the last 100 years answering to the wrong name. Not because anyone lied, but because a name got attached in a hurry, in the excitement of 1911, and the whole world simply repeated it ever after. Now, be careful here, because this is a mystery, not a magic trick. These researchers are not claiming they found a stone sign reading Huayna Picchu. They are reconstructing the most probable original name from the paper trail. But even as a probability, it is astonishing. And it plants a question that will follow us all the way to the end. If we got the name wrong, sitting in plain sight in old documents for a century, what else have we gotten wrong about this mountain? Let us go back to the day the modern world thinks it all began. To find it, you have to go back to a cold, wet morning in July of 1911. A young man from Yale University named Hiram Bingham is pushing his way up a river valley in southern Peru. He is not looking for Machu Picchu. He has never heard the name. He is chasing a different ghost entirely, the last hidden refuge of the Inca kings, a legendary place called Vilcabamba, where the empire made its final stand against the Spanish. Bingham is hunting for a lost city. He just has the wrong one in his head. The going is brutal. Rain, mud, leeches, the roar of the Urubamba below. The forest closes over the trail like a green ceiling. And somewhere along that river, Bingham meets a local farmer named Melchor Arteaga, who tells him something that stops him cold. There are ruins up there, on the ridge above, big ones. So Bingham climbs. He drags himself up a near vertical slope of jungle and stone, sweating and swearing, expecting, at best, a few crumbling farm walls. And when he finally hauls himself over the top, he does not find a silent, empty, lost city sleeping under vines. He finds people. He finds families. The Richart and the Alvarez families are living right there among the Inca walls. They have cleared the ancient terraces. They are growing corn and potatoes in soil the Inca prepared 5 centuries earlier. Children play where nobles once walked. And when Bingham needs someone to lead him through the thick brush toward the great stone temples he can barely see, it is not a fellow explorer who guides him. It is a local boy, a child who lives on the mountain, who knows its hidden paths the way you know the rooms of your own home, takes the famous explorer by the hand and leads him into history. Sit with that image for a second, because it quietly destroys the story we were all taught. The heroic outsider did not discover an empty city. He was shown around an inhabited one by a boy who had grown up there. In the story we inherited, the explorer holds the camera, but the child holds the map. And it gets better. Or, if you are Hiram Bingham, worse. Because as he explores those magnificent ruins, he comes across something written on the stone. Not ancient Inca carving, modern writing. A name and a date. A. Lizarraga, 1902. Agustin Lizarraga, a local man who had climbed to these ruins 9 years before Bingham ever set eyes on them, and left his signature like a visitor in a guest book. Bingham's own notes admit it. Someone had beaten him to the lost city by nearly a decade. And the truth is, others had been circling this place for even longer. Go back further still, to the 1860s, and you find a German businessman named August Burns. Burns bought land in the region, and, according to old maps and titles, formed a company for one blunt purpose: to strip the Inca ruins of their gold. He was not a scholar. He was a treasure hunter with paperwork. Decades before Bingham, outsiders already knew there was something up on that ridge worth taking. So was Machu Picchu ever really lost? To the families farming its terraces, no. To Lizarraga, no. To Burns and his investors, no. It was lost only to the wider world, to museums and universities and newspapers. And this is the real heart of the controversy. It is not whether Bingham was a hero or a fraud. That question is boring. The real question is far more interesting. What does the word discover even mean when people already live in the place you claim to find? And let us be fair to Bingham, because the truth is more complicated than a villain story. He did something enormous. He photographed the ruins, he mapped them, he excavated them, he won the backing of Yale and the National Geographic Society. He put Machu Picchu in front of the entire world, in glossy pages and lantern slides, until the name burned itself into the global imagination. He did not find a city no one knew, but he made a city everyone would remember. The trouble is that in making it famous, he also carried a great deal of it away, and we will come back to that, because those objects have a journey of their own, and it is one of the most surprising parts of this whole story. But first, we have to answer a bigger question. Who ordered this impossible place into existence in the first place? To do that, we travel back another 500 years, into the 15th century, to a man whose very name meant the overturning of the world. His name was Pachacuti, and according to Inca tradition, he took a small, ordinary kingdom around the city of Cusco and, through war and will and vision, began forging it into the largest empire the Americas had ever seen, an empire the Inca called Tawantinsuyu, the Four United Regions. Pachacuti was its architect, and in the world of the Inca, a great emperor did not just conquer land, he built estates, private royal worlds that were part palace, part temple, part monument to his own power. Most modern scholars believe Machu Picchu was exactly that, a royal estate belonging to Pachacuti and his lineage. So picture the mountain not as a quiet ruin, but as a living court. Picture Pachacuti arriving in a great procession with nobles and priests, servants and musicians, llamas loaded with food and fine cloth. For a season, the cold ridge above the Urubamba becomes the center of the world, a mountain palace wrapped in mist and ceremony and the smoke of offerings. That is the strongest story we have, and for a long time, it felt settled. We knew who built it and roughly when. The middle of the 1400s, after Pachacuti rose to power. And then science walked in and quietly broke the timeline. In the year 2021, a team led by the archaeologist Richard Berger used a precise form of radiocarbon dating on the remains of 26 people who had been buried at Machu Picchu. They were trying to pin down exactly when the site was in use, and their results came back with a date that did not fit the textbook. The bones suggested people were living at Machu Picchu from around the year 1420, possibly 2 decades earlier than the traditional story of Pachacuti allows. Now, this does not erase Pachacuti from the picture, but it cracks open a beautiful new mystery. Because if people were already up on that mountain around 1420, then one of two strange things must be true. Either construction began earlier than we thought, or the great emperor himself rose to power sooner than the old colonial chronologies claim, which would mean the entire timeline of how the Inca Empire was born needs to be rewritten. A story we thought was closed has quietly reopened, and notice what keeps happening on this mountain. Every time we think we have Machu Picchu figured out, it reaches back and moves the ground beneath our feet. So let us stop asking when for a moment and start asking how. Because however you feel about lost names and shifting dates, one fact never changes. Someone built a masterpiece on the spine of a mountain, in one of the most difficult places on Earth to build anything at all. Run your hand along one of the fine walls of Machu Picchu and you will feel it. The best stones are shaped from local granite and granodiorite, cut and fitted so perfectly that they lock together without a single drop of mortar. No cement, no glue, just stone kissing stone so tightly that famously you cannot slide a blade between them. And I want to be honest with you, because the honesty makes it better. There is no lost alien technology here. No mysterious ray that melted rock like butter. What there is something almost more impressive. Human hands, hammerstones, endless patience, armies of workers who understood how granite wants to break, who shaped each block by hand, dressed it, tested it, lifted it, and set it into place. The mystery of Machu Picchu is not magic. It is the sheer, staggering scale of organized human skill, and that is far more moving than aliens. The mountain itself even helped. Recent studies show the ridge is riddled with natural cracks and fracture lines, and that much of the stone was quarried right there on the site, rather than dragged from miles away. The builders read the mountain like a book and let it give them its stone. But here is the part almost no visitor ever sees. The true masterpiece of Machu Picchu is not the walls you photograph. It is hidden beneath your feet, because this mountain is drowned in rain. Something like 2 meters of it fall on that ridge every single year. Try building heavy stone palaces on a steep, slippery slope in that kind of downpour, and gravity and water will tear your city off the mountain and throw it into the river. The Inca knew this, And so, long before they raised a single beautiful wall, they built something invisible, a vast, brilliant system of drainage. The engineer Kenneth Wright spent years documenting it. Those famous agricultural terraces are not just flat shelves for growing corn. Deep inside, they are layered with stone and gravel, engineered to swallow the rain, channel it away, and lock the whole mountain in place. Most of Machu Picchu's genius is buried in the dark, doing its silent work. There is a line that captures it perfectly. The walls made Machu Picchu beautiful, but the drainage kept it alive. And the water was not only a problem to be solved, it was a guest to be honored. The Inca captured a natural spring on the mountain and led it through a stone canal roughly 750 meters long into the very heart of the settlement. There, it fed a staircase of 16 fountains, one flowing into the next, carrying living water down through the sacred core of the city. Picture this. It is before dawn. There are no crowds, no cameras, no lines of tourists. There is only black stone and cold mist and the calls of unseen birds. And through it all, still moving, still falling from fountain to fountain, is water. Water flowing along a path an Inca engineer designed more than 500 years ago, and never stopped since. The mountain fights back in other ways too. This is earthquake country, and the ground here shakes, and Machu Picchu has largely survived it. Its walls lean slightly inward. Its doorways and windows are shaped like trapezoids, wider at the base. Its foundations are deep, and its stones locked. You will hear people say the Inca designed every stone to dance in an earthquake and settle neatly back into place. That is a lovely image, and it goes a little too far. The truer, and honestly more impressive, statement is simpler. Inca building was so resilient that it has stood through centuries of tremors on the side of a shaking mountain when so much else has fallen. So we have a royal estate, an engineering marvel, a city that drinks rain and rides earthquakes, but we still have not touched the strangest and most beautiful truth about Machu Picchu. For the people who built it, none of this was only engineering. To understand that, you have to stop thinking like a builder and start thinking like an Inca. In the Andean world, the mountains were not scenery. They were alive. Certain peaks, springs, caves, and stones were what the Inca called huacas, and the greatest mountains were apus, powerful sacred beings, lords of the landscape, watching over the people who lived in their shadow. So when you stand at Machu Picchu and look up at that iconic sharp green peak behind the ruins, do not see it as a pretty backdrop. To an Inca standing where you stand 5 centuries ago, that mountain was a living presence. The landscape was not something you looked at. It was something that looked back. And above it all moved the greatest power of the Inca sky, Inti, the sun. The sun was the divine ancestor of the Inca ruler himself, the source of his right to rule. So when you find, at Machu Picchu, a temple with a window perfectly placed to catch the light of the rising sun, you are not looking at some ancient science lab. For the Inca, watching the sun was watching a god, and a grandfather, and a king, and a calendar, all at once. Ritual, power, farming, and family were one single thing. The strongest piece of evidence for this is a place called Intimakai. Researchers showed that a specially built opening there was designed to catch the light of the rising sun during a narrow window of days around the December solstice. On those mornings, and almost no others, the first light of the returning sun reaches inside. That is not a vague claim that everything lines up with the stars. That is a precise, deliberate conversation between architecture and sky. Then there is the famous carved stone called the Intihuatana. You will hear it called the hitching post of the sun, a perfect astronomical clock. And here I have to be honest with you again, because the honesty is more interesting than the myth. The exact purpose of that stone is still debated. What we can say is that it sat at the meeting point of sky, sacred mountains, direction, and ritual. It was almost certainly something far richer and stranger than a simple clock. It was a place where the human, the earthly, and the heavenly were bound together in stone. And this sacred landscape has its own deep stories. Stories the Inca told to explain where the world and they themselves came from. Let me tell you 2 of them, the way they were meant to be told, as legend. The first is the story of Viracocha. It is said that before there were emperors, before there was Cusco, before there was Machu Picchu, a creator walked through a dark and unfinished world. He raised the mountains, he called people out of the earth and the caves and the lakes. He set the sun and the moon in the sky, and then, his work done, the creator walked away across the water and vanished, leaving behind a world that was now sacred in every stone and stream. That is the world the Inca believed they lived inside. Not an empty stage, but a landscape soaked in divine memory. The second is the story of the Ir siblings. It is told that from a cave in a place called Tembotoco, 4 brothers and 4 sisters first emerged into the world. They journeyed across the land in search of a home, and their journey was full of wonder and betrayal. One brother, too strong and too dangerous, was sealed inside the earth. Another was turned to stone. And at last, the survivors reached a valley and founded the city that would become Cusco, and with it, the Inca line. Now, that legend does not prove anything about Machu Picchu, but it shows you the shape of the Inca mind. A world where a journey, a landscape, a stone, an ancestor, and the right to rule were all woven into a single sacred idea. Once you feel that, you understand why they did not just live on this mountain. They worshipped it, and through it, they touched their gods. But here is where the story turns human, and where it breaks your heart a little. Because for all the talk of emperors and gods and sacred peaks, Machu Picchu was not filled with kings. Most of the people who lived and died up there were nobody the history books ever named, and they have been quietly keeping the greatest secret of all. Machu Picchu was small. Based on the buildings that survive, researchers think no more than about 750 people lived there at any one time, and most of them were not royalty. They were the ones who made royal life possible: cooks, weavers, farmers, attendants, the servants of the mountain. For a long time, there was a strange and haunting theory about who these people were. In the early days, a scientist named George Eaton studied the skeletons Bingham had removed and concluded that the dead were overwhelmingly women, something like 4 women for every man. And that single number lit a fire in the imagination. If the mountain was full of women, then perhaps Machu Picchu had been a sanctuary of sacred, chosen women, the so-called Virgins of the Sun, a holy city of priestesses in the clouds. It was an irresistible story, and it was wrong. Decades later, the bones were examined again with better methods by the osteologist John Verano, and the sacred women dissolved into thin air. The sex of the skeletons had been badly misread. The population was, in fact, much more balanced. Men and women, ordinary people, living ordinary hard lives. And notice what just happened, because it is the deepest pattern in this entire story. A scientist looked at the evidence and built an imaginary city on top of it. And when the evidence was read again, that imaginary city simply vanished. Every generation, it seems, builds its own Machu Picchu out of the bones it is handed. But the real people left a truth in those bones that no legend could match, and modern science has finally learned to read it. In the year 2023, researchers did something Bingham could never have dreamed of. They recovered ancient DNA from the genomes of 34 individuals buried at Machu Picchu. They were reading, letter by letter, the genetic code of the mountain's forgotten servants. And what they found was breathtaking. These people did not all come from the same valley. They did not even all come from the same region. Their ancestry reached across the vast body of the Inca Empire, pointing to distant and different corners of that enormous world. An earlier study of the chemistry in their teeth and bones had already hinted at it. The DNA confirmed it. The people buried at Machu Picchu were an empire in miniature, gathered onto one mountain. So let me tell you their story, the one they never got to tell themselves. Imagine a young person, taken or recruited from a faraway province, from a landscape utterly unlike this one, a different climate, different food, maybe a different language on their tongue. They are brought here to serve in the mountain estate of an emperor they may never even see. They spend their life in labor in this cold and beautiful place, and they die here and are laid in the earth of a mountain that was never their home. And then, 500 years later, long after the emperor and his gold and his glory have turned to dust and legend, that person speaks, not in words, in the chemistry of their teeth, in the code inside their bones. And what they finally get to tell us is the truth the chronicles never recorded. The astonishing human reach of the world that carried them here. The empire stops being a map on a wall. It becomes a person with a face you will never see, whispering across 5 centuries. And that mattered, because that empire was about to fall. Which brings us to the eeriest question of all. What happened to them? Why did everyone simply leave? The dating tells us that Machu Picchu emptied out around the 1530s. And you know what else was happening in the 1530s? The Spanish. Pizarro and his men had landed, and the Inca world was shattering. And so you might expect a dramatic ending here. A siege, a battle. Conquistadors storming the terraces, fire and blood, and a burning city. But that is not what the mountain shows us. There is no great battle layer at Machu Picchu. No scorched ruin. No evidence that the Spanish ever even reached it. The end of Machu Picchu was quieter, and somehow far more haunting than any battle. The estate did not die in flames. It starved of purpose. When the Inca state collapsed, the whole machine that fed this mountain collapsed with it. The emperor was gone. The labor that carried food up the trails stopped coming. And ahead of the Spanish soldiers themselves came something even deadlier. Invisible waves of European disease that swept through the Andes and killed people who had never seen a European face. The society that made Machu Picchu possible simply came apart. So picture the last days, not a massacre, a slow fading. Fewer people each season, the terraces going untended, the great plazas falling silent, and through all of it, the water still running, fountain to fountain, as if nothing had changed, until one day, there is no one left to hear it. The doors stand open, the mist rolls in, and the forest, patient and green, begins to climb the walls and swallow the city whole. Machu Picchu did not fall, it fell asleep, and it slept for centuries, until the outsiders came back. Which returns us, at last, to Hiram Bingham and to the objects he carried down the mountain. Because their story did not end when they left Peru. In a way, it was only beginning. After Bingham's expeditions, a great deal of Machu Picchu traveled north. Tens of thousands of pieces, ceramics, bronze tools, stone objects, and the human and animal remains from those mountain graves, the very bones that would one day give up their secrets. They crossed the sea to Yale University, in Connecticut, and there they stayed, for decades. And then a slow, painful argument began. Peru said the objects had left the country as a loan, for study, and were supposed to come home. Yale saw it differently, and so, for the better part of a century, the two sides disagreed over who truly owned the physical remains of an ancient civilization. Who owns the past, the country whose ancestors made it, or the institution that carried it away and kept it safe? That argument grew into protests in Peru, into lawsuits, into diplomacy at the highest levels, and finally, in the year 2010, an agreement was reached, and something beautiful began to happen. The objects started coming home. Crate by crate, they crossed the continent again, but this time in the opposite direction, south, back to Peru, back to Cusco, where much of the collection now rests in a museum called Casa Concha. Do you feel the symmetry of that? A century earlier, Machu Picchu had left the mountain, first as photographs, then as bones, then as pottery and fragments. And now, 100 years on, boxes were making the long journey back the other way, home. And here is the quiet irony at the center of it all. Bingham did not carry away a fortune in Inca gold. There was no treasure room. The real treasure he removed was information, bones and fragments and everyday things. And in the end, those humble fragments told us more than any gold ever could. They told us who these people were and where they came from. But the mountain was not finished with its mysteries, because Bingham, remember, had never even been looking for Machu Picchu. He had been hunting a different lost city, and that hunt leads us into the wildest, most legendary corner of this whole story, the lost cities beyond the lost city. Bingham's true obsession was Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of the Inca, the jungle refuge where the final free Inca rulers held out against Spain after Cusco fell. He wanted to be the man who found it, and here is the almost unbearable irony. Vilcabamba was real, but it did not lie at Machu Picchu. It lay deeper in the wilderness, at a place called Espiritu Pampa, and Bingham actually reached it. He stood near it, But the jungle had swallowed its true scale, and he did not recognize what he was looking at. He walked past the city he was searching for, on his way to becoming famous for a city he was not. It is the kind of irony that would feel too perfect if you put it in a novel. But it really happened. And beyond even Vilcabamba lies a legend that has drawn dreamers and destroyed explorers for 400 years. Pachacuti. It is said that somewhere east of the Andes, out in the endless green ocean of the Amazon, there lies another Inca world. A last, hidden kingdom, glittering with the gold the Spanish never found. Colonial documents whisper of it. Expeditions have vanished chasing it. And to this day, people still walk into the jungle looking for Pachacuti, and some of them never walk out. Now, let me be clear. In the register this deserves. No one has ever found a golden city called Pachacuti. It lives in the country between history and dream, born from real Inca movements into the Amazon and centuries of European hunger for gold. And that ambiguity is exactly what gives it power. The moment you could point to Pachacuti on a map, it would stop being a legend. Its magic is that it stays just beyond the edge of the known. And Machu Picchu itself became a screen onto which every age projects its own dream. To Bingham, it was the lost city of the Incas. To the early bone hunters, it was a sanctuary of sacred women. And today, an entire modern mythology has grown over it like the vines once did. People speak of energy vortices, of portals, of mystical vibrations, of stones raised by beings from the stars. None of that has any support in the ground. But it is fascinating as a mirror, because it shows you that we cannot leave this mountain alone. Every generation climbs up there and finds, staring back, a reflection of whatever it most wants to believe. Mithi. Which brings us, finally, back down out of legend and into the present day. Because the most astonishing thing about Machu Picchu is not that it was lost long ago. It is that we are still finding it right now. In recent years, researchers began looking beneath the famous grassy main plaza, the smooth green lawn where millions of visitors take their photographs. Using satellites, drones, and instruments that peer into the ground, a study published in the year 2023 suggested that hidden under that perfect lawn are the scars of the city's birth, old quarry zones, early drainage, the rough, working landscape of stone and rubble and labor that came before the elegant plaza was ever laid down. The serene green surface you see is a mask over the sweat and struggle of Machu Picchu's making. And then came the discovery that is still fresh enough to make the hair stand up. This year, in the year 2026, archaeologists took to the forest around Machu Picchu with LiDAR, a technology that fires countless pulses of laser light at the ground and, in effect, digitally strips away the trees to reveal whatever is hiding beneath the canopy. They aimed it at a dense, tangled sector to the east, near a place called the Mandor Wall. And the forest gave up a secret it had kept for centuries. The lasers revealed more than 2.5 kilometers of ancient pre-Hispanic pathways, hidden under the vegetation. One route, over 1 kilometer long, runs in a distinctive zigzag pattern, exactly the way the Inca built their mountain roads. Alongside it, hints of platforms and terraces no one had ever mapped. Now, I have to be honest with you, because honesty is the whole spirit of this story. This is early work, a first look. The teams themselves say the age and purpose of these features still have to be confirmed with careful investigation on the ground. This is not a solved discovery. It is a brand new question, opening right now, in real time. But think about what that means. More than 500 years after the Inca walked away from this mountain, more than 100 years after a young explorer was led to its ruins by a local boy, and still, the forest around Machu Picchu is handing us roads we never knew existed. And that is the truth I want to leave you with. We were told a simple story, a lost city found by a hero, solved and photographed and finished. And almost every piece of that story has quietly come apart in our hands. We may have called it by the wrong name. The hero was guided by people already living there. Another man's signature was on the wall 9 years before him. The emperor's timeline may be wrong. The servant's bones held an empire. Its greatest engineering is buried in the dark. Its temples spoke to a living sky. And even now, lasers are pulling new roads out of the trees. Machu Picchu was never truly lost. The families on its terraces always knew it was there. But here is the strange and wonderful thing. More than 5 centuries after the Inca left it silent in the clouds, we are still, to this very day, discovering what it actually was. The mountain is still talking, and we are only just beginning to understand what it is saying. So let me ask you something, and I would truly love your answer. Of all the mysteries we walked through today, the lost name, the boy who knew more than the explorer, the empire hidden inside the bones, the roads still surfacing from the forest, which one shook you the most? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and I love talking these things through with you. And if this journey up the mountain meant something to you, please help this little channel keep climbing. As I said at the start, there are no sponsors here, no big company, just a lot of care and the kindness of people who show up to listen like you. If you would, subscribe, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this along to someone who still believes the world has real mysteries left in it. It helps more than you could possibly know. Thank you, sincerely, for staying with me all the way to the top. And I will see you on the next one.